Which country has higher GDP per capita in 2024?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
Correct answer is Malaysia. Malaysia maintains higher income per capita due to a smaller population and more advanced industries.
Which country has attracted more global tech companies to set up regional hubs?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
Correct answer is Malaysia. Kuala Lumpur and Penang are growing as hubs for semiconductor and AI investments.
Which country produces more unicorn startups?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesia has more billion-dollar startups like Gojek, Tokopedia, and J&T Express.
Which country has a more developed public transportation network in its capital city?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Kuala Lumpur's MRT, LRT, and KTM systems are more integrated than Jakarta's.
Which country experienced more political instability between 2018 to 2023?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Malaysia saw multiple changes in prime ministers and coalitions in a short time.
Which country's government gives more affirmative action based on race?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Malaysia's Bumiputera policies are race-based, while Indonesia uses more universal poverty targeting.
Which country is building a new capital city to reduce the burden on its current one?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesia's Nusantara project aims to ease overpopulation in Jakarta.
Which country has better healthcare services per capita?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
Malaysia's public healthcare system is widely regarded as more accessible and higher quality.
Which country is more unified under one national language in daily life?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Bahasa Indonesia is more dominant in all aspects of life than Bahasa Malaysia, which shares space with English and Chinese dialects.
Which country is seen as more liberal in terms of media and political expression?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Despite challenges, Indonesia's press and public discourse are often more open and chaotic.
Which country has been more successful in becoming a halal tourism destination?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Malaysia brands itself as a global halal leader in travel, food, and certification.
Which country's monarchy plays a more active, symbolic, and unifying role?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. The rotating monarchy is a distinct national symbol in Malaysia's identity.
Which country has more global musical and pop culture influence in Southeast Asia?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesian artists and platforms dominate regional music and entertainment.
Which country's political leaders are more often from elite or dynastic backgrounds?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Malaysia's politics has strong dynastic and elite family ties.
Which country shows greater success in reducing poverty over the last 2 decades?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesia has made significant strides in lifting millions out of poverty, especially in rural areas.
Which country has more natural resources that are critical for the electric vehicle EV industry?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesia holds one of the world's largest nickel reserves, essential for EV batteries.
Which country faces more public backlash over religious enforcement in daily life?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Debates over Sharia law and moral policing are more prominent in Malaysia's media and public discourse.
Which country has more diverse regional cuisines recognized internationally?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesian food, example, rendang, nasi goreng, satay, frequently appears in global rankings.
Which country has a more transparent electoral process according to international observers?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesia's KPU, Election Commission, is seen as more independent and digitalized.
Which country is more commonly accused of identity politics in election campaigns?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Race and religion often dominate campaign narratives in Malaysia.
Which country's elite education institutions rank higher globally?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Malaysian universities like and UKM consistently outrank Indonesia's in QS rankings.
Which country has faced more international disputes over haze and deforestation?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesia's forest fires and palm oil practices often cause regional haze, affecting neighboring countries.
Which country's youth are more involved in political activism and street movements?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Student and civil protests are more common and large-scale in Indonesia, especially post-Suharto.
Which country's capital city suffers more from flooding and overdevelopment?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Jakarta faces chronic flooding, land subsidence, and traffic issues, prompting the move to Nusantara.
Which country is often seen as more bureaucratic and slower in business processes?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesia has long battled red tape and corruption, though reforms are ongoing.
Which country gives more subsidies to maintain fuel and basic food prices?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Malaysia heavily subsidizes fuel, cooking oil, and basic foods to ease the cost of living.
Which country's national anthem was once accused of being too similar to the others?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Controversy arose over similarities between Negaraku and an Indonesian song, though both drew from colonial-era melodies.
Which country experienced a larger-scale COVID-19 economic disruption?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
Malaysia had strict, prolonged lockdowns, e.g. MCO, which hit small businesses and unemployment hard.
Which country has a bigger and more vocal entertainment industry? Film, TV, music.
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Indonesia. Indonesia's entertainment sector produces more volume and has wider Southeast Asian influence.
Which country's judiciary is seen as more independent from political interference?
Indonesia or Malaysia?
The answer is Malaysia. Recent high-profile prosecutions, example like 1MDB, have showcased Malaysia's judiciary asserting its independence.